Welcome back, once again, to the realm of Final Fantasy XIV. Now that the regular 3 dungeons are out of the way, we can take a look at something a little more difficult. Today we're going to be looking at the new Primal added in 2.4, Shiva. Specifically, Shiva Extreme. At the time of recording this, you had to join a pre-existing party in order to enter this. They've since removed that limit, so you can actually queue up in the Duty Finder solo. And I'm gonna be honest, it's actually a really fun fight. Your reward for victory is an item level 110 weapon, which can then be upgraded to 120, at least I think it's 120. And an item level 120 bracelet. The item needed to upgrade the weapon also drops from this fight. In fact, I believe you're guaranteed 1 per fight. You need 5 to upgrade the weapon. I do not like what the light makes my nose look like here. And so we come face to face with Shiva in a snow-laden arena. The fight against Shiva is divided up into 3 major areas. The first phase of the fight is rather short, but it plays very differently from the last phase. The second phase is mostly an in-between. It's a DPS check phase. And then the final phase will be taking up the vast majority of your battle. We've got somebody who's going to drop out and restart their client to make sure their internet connection is actually working ready, so just a moment while we figure things out. You can see one very important thing that we're doing is dividing up the arena into 4 spots, the A, B, C, and D, which is where Shiva is herself. These are important as each person is designated a location to go to. That's 2 people per spot. And each person is also then given an inner and an outer. So you'll have 1 person on inner C, 1 person on outer C, 1 person on inner A, 1 person on outer A. The tank always goes to D, which is where Shiva is. A melee DPS will then usually go along with D as well. More on that momentarily, though. The first phase of the battle will last for approximately the first 20% of Shiva's health. And during this phase, you're going to have to deal with 2 major mechanics. You see, Shiva can wield a weapon crafted from ice, and it can either be a sword or a staff, and she can also then alternate between the 2. She starts the fight with no weapon at all, but very briefly creates one of them, and she'll be using that for a period of time. You can actually see a status effect next to her name designating what state she's in. After an amount of time, she'll put the weapon away and go back to bare-handed for just a moment before pulling out another weapon. She may pull out the same weapon, or she may pull out the other weapon. There's a little bit of randomness involved in that. Each weapon grants her a different moveset of abilities that she can do, and she will be using them in seemingly random order. However, once she moves to this new weapon, she is always guaranteed to use 1 specific ability at the start. After that, it will be mostly random from the selection of abilities she has at her disposal, though I have not seen her use that very first ability a second time. When she floats straight up in the air, she's about to pull out her sword and shield. When she does this, you can see the small sword icon next to her name, and this will always immediately be followed by Ice Brand. Icebrand is the large claw-like shapes that fly out of the ground away from her. And Icebrand does a substantial amount of damage. I don't remember the exact number, but it's something in the neighborhood of 18,000 damage. However, it's distributed evenly amongst everyone hit by it. So as soon as Shiva pulls out her sword, everyone is going to want to make sure to be clumped together, and even the tank will want to run over and get in the rest of the party, so the whole party can eat this one attack. The tank then promptly runs back to Shiva's other side. Throughout the course of pretty much this entire fight, the entire party will be stacking on Shiva's backside. Now, while Shiva has her weapon out, whenever she does a regular attack on someone, it will put a debuff on them that lowers their damage resistance to her other weapon. So, as our tank was hit by the sword, it put a debuff on him that gave him a blunt resistance down. This is a stacking debuff, and does not fade away for a very long time. Typically in this fight, you go in with two tanks. One is designated the sword tank, and the other is designated the staff tank. This ensures that the sword tank can get as many stacks of the blunt damage debuff down as they want, because they will never actually be getting hit by blunt damage. Here, however, we've opted for a solo tank run, and I'm not entirely sure there's even any strategy involved in this. The one tank is going to be getting all of the debuffs, and we only have the two healers to keep the one tank alive. I'm pretty sure the one additional DPS is really just there to prevent the soft enrage. To prevent us getting near the soft enrage that comes not only from the debuffs that get put on the tank, but from something else that happens momentarily. Now, the various abilities that each form uses I'll be going over as we get to them. Here, Shiva actually opted not to do any other special attacks, merely hit the tank once to put that debuff on him. Because in the first phase of the fight, whenever Shiva is done with a form, she'll summon various circular AoEs around the arena. There are ones on the ground and in the air. The ones in the air actually do not matter. They're merely there to obscure your vision and make it harder to see what's down below. So I'll lower the camera a little bit so you can see what the actual AoEs on the bottom look like. But there is one circle in the middle, and 7 circles surrounding that one circle. 1 to each of the 8 major directions, and there is one safe spot where an AoE does not spawn. Now, if you manage to spot this safe spot, it is probably for the best to get into it, but it's far easier, and most groups I've found simply stand in the very middle and make sure they only get hit by the one AoE. This one AoE hurts for a good couple thousand damage, and also puts a debuff on you that's simply a vulnerability up debuff that'll last approximately 1 minute. Only one stack of this debuff actually isn't that big a deal, so as long as you only get hit by one of these AoEs, and everyone is standing together, the healers can simply heal everybody full again, and it's not that big a deal. However, if you're standing off to a side and get hit by 2 of these, not only will you be down to almost no health, but you'll have 2 stacks of this vulnerability up debuff, which ensures you're taking a substantial amount more damage. That debuff should wear off by the time she does this again, so you don't have to worry about it stacking repeatedly as the fight goes on. But now that she's done that, she's back to her bare-handed form, and she's merely going to smack the tank a couple times before she decides to pull out another weapon. However, one other thing that she does during this phase is, as far as I can tell, every time she goes into the bare-handed phase, she puts a stacking buff on herself. This buff does not wear off and increases the damage she does. It's a minimal increase, but it stacks and does not go away. This, combined with the debuff put on the tank, is the soft enrage of the fight, as by the end of this fight, the tank is taking a monumental amount of damage, and Shiva is doing a monumental amount of damage. Of note, however, is there not only this soft enrage, there is also a hard enrage. After she gets approximately 10 stacks of this buff on her, I think it's 10 anyway, she'll simply use Diamond Dust and wipe the party. Here you see Shiva spin around and say the cycle ends here and now. If you look down on her buffs and debuffs, you'll actually see a staff icon appear, which means she has now changed to staff form. Now, as with sword form, staff form has its own set of abilities, and she will always open staff form with one specific ability. This ability will put an AoE around a large number of people in the arena that will follow you and will hit you. Being an AoE, you do not want to be standing near anybody else. Not only will you hit them with your own AoE, but you could also be hit by their AoE. These will stack, and if you get hit by more than one or two of these, you will probably die. This is where the lettered sections come from, though their true use won't be until her second phase. As soon as you see her enter staff phase, run off in your direction and make sure you're away from anybody else. Simply spread out enough that your attack will only hit you, and work your way back to Shiva and get to fighting. Now after that initial attack, Shiva only really has one attack in staff form, and that's Absolute Zero, which is an unavoidable raid-wide AoE that'll hit for 1,000 to 2,000 damage. And that's about it for staff form. However, we've just managed to push her to about 80% of her health, which means we've pushed her into the damage check, the DPS check phase. The DPS check phase starts with these 4 sparkles, these 4 snowflakes going out to the corners of the arena, and 4 ice soldiers spawning. These ice soldiers need to die within an amount of time. Not only are the ice soldiers spawning, but as soon as you enter this DPS check phase, Shiva sheathes her weapon, and will very shortly draw another. Everyone should stack in the middle of the arena, not only to draw all of the ice soldiers in, but because, more often than not, the weapon that she will draw is the sword, so everyone needs to be stacked together to eat Ice Brand. Once Ice Brand goes off, the tank merely has to tank Shiva until the DPS check phase ends. It's now everyone else's job to defeat the ice soldiers. AoE as much as you can. We have 3 black mages, so I'm sure that'll go fine. I'm going to be doing my best to wail on the ice soldiers individually, since my AoE isn't that great. However, what I'm going to be doing is focusing on the ice soldier that has the most HP. This ensures that the black mage's AoEs are doing the most efficient damage. Now, while we were killing the ice soldiers, you actually saw 2 other attacks that the sword form uses, but I'll be getting to those here in a moment. Once all the ice soldiers are gone, you still have an amount of time to whittle down Shiva. In fact, I'm pretty sure you can force her into the next phase of the battle by bringing her down to about 65% of her HP. But 65%, or if the time passes, she will disappear and ready Diamond Dust. Everyone will be frozen, and if the ice soldiers aren't dead, you die. If they are, thankfully, you merely take 1,000 to 2,000 damage and push her into the second phase of the fight. The second phase of the fight is a fair bit different from the first phase, however it is at the same time still reasonably similar. She'll be going back and forth between the various phases, just as we have before, with the sword form and the staff form. However, she will also introduce a bow form. We'll get to that one shortly, because as she starts in her bare-handed form, very shortly, she will summon a fair number of AoEs. This is now what she will be doing in her bare-handed form. It will start with 4 AoEs. They will all be centered around the corners of the arena. They will either be at the 4 poles, northeast, southwest, or the 4 diagonals. Since we're all stacked in the middle, this AoE is should be harmless. However, it also tells us where the safe spots will be for the next AoE, which then is where our letter designations are even more important. You see, where each one of these AoEs is where a safe spot will be in the next attack. You'll notice here they don't actually line up with the letters. Sometimes they will line up, sometimes they will be offset by 45 degrees. If they are offset, you always go clockwise from your letter. So if your letter is C, and the safe spot is at the diagonals, you move to the safe spot between C and B. This is also where it's important to remember your inner or outer designation. As you can see here, after the first AoE goes down, she pulls out her staff, which means she's actually going to be doing the exact same move that she did in her first form, where an AoE is placed around a fair number of people. Keeping in mind that you do not want to get hit by more than one of these AoEs. I was designated with inner D, and our tank is outer D. So you can see the tank actually running to the outside of this safe spot, and I am on the inside. This way, we don't hit each other with our AoEs. Once all of the AoEs go off, we run back to the center and go start beating on Shiva again. Now, as I mentioned before, Shiva only has one other major attack in staff form, and that is Absolute Zero, which is just flat raid-wide damage. Not much you can do, so if you really want to lay into her, now's a good time to do it. After an amount of time, Shiva will ready another AoE. This one is centered in the middle, and then goes clockwise around the outside of the arena. Think of these a little bit like Titan's bombs. These AoEs will go off in the same order that they spawn in, which means the one in the center of the arena is the first to go off. To dodge this, you see where the second one was, and run outside of the first AoE, standing just next to the second one. As soon as the first AoE goes off and the middle of the arena is clear, you run back to the middle to avoid all of the other AoEs. Now, doing this also signifies her change into her next form. Oh, and you may recall this from the hard mode of this fight. Permafrost. Permafrost works exactly like it did in the hard mode. As soon as you see the swirl around the arena, stop moving. Once Permafrost is cast, if you move at all, you will go careening across the arena. And if you careen into the edge of the arena, you will be frozen in ice. Once frozen in ice, you will take a very strong damage over time. If your team can break you out, you can return to the foray. Otherwise, you will probably just die. Permafrost will be cast randomly throughout the entire fight. It follows no set pattern, so simply be prepared. Permafrost kind of interrupted her pattern here, but as soon as it goes away, she'll continue and move into her next form. Instead of going strictly between sword and staff, as she did in the first phase of the fight, she will now go to either sword or staff, then to bow, then back to either sword or staff, then back to bow again. Bow form, unlike sword and staff, does not put a debuff on the tank, so there's no worry for that. However, it does seem to simply hit harder overall, probably to make up for the fact that there is no debuff for it. There are two major attacks that you have to worry about in bow form. The first is the one she uses immediately after entering bow form. So as soon as you see all the AoEs clear, as soon as you see the ice go away if Permafrost happened to be cast, get behind Shiva. Do not hesitate, because she will immediately use an AoE that will go out and hit 270 degrees around her. Pretty much if you look at her hitbox, if you're standing with the red between you and her, such as Midnight Celeste there, you will be hit by this. And you will die. So everyone, tank included, has to stack behind Shiva the instant the previous attacks are done. Once that's done, the tank will grab Shiva and drag her to the far north side of the arena, where you have a moment to simply wail on her before her second attack goes off in bow form. She only has the 2 attacks, and she does use them in a set pattern. So you don't have to worry about that, at least. The second attack she uses, after a brief amount of time, you will see an arrow pointing down over someone's head. Here it's actually pointing down over the tank. Assuming it's not the tank that gets hit by this, the person who has the mark over their head wants to get right behind Shiva, and everyone else needs to get in front of Shiva. Because when the attack goes off, it is a directional AoE that'll hit for a fair amount of damage, but nothing too painful. It will hit everyone in line, which is why everyone is sure to be on the opposite side of Shiva, and it will also knock you back. If Shiva's in the middle of the arena when you get hit by this is the purpose of her being moved. If Shiva's in the middle of the arena when you get hit by this will knock you into the ice circling the arena and freeze you. If Shiva's pulled to the north side of the arena, as she is here, when you're hit by it, it will merely knock you about halfway to 3/4 of the way across the arena, and you can jump back into the fight. If the tank is targeted by this, everyone stays stacked behind Shiva, and the tank merely uses one of his cooldowns that prevents knockback. Once the attack goes off, the tank then pulls Shiva right back to the center of the arena, but for now, bow form is effectively done. Which means very shortly we'll be moving back to the bare-handed form. And going back to the bare-handed form is once again signaled by the various AoEs around the arena, which tell you where the safe spots are going to be for the next one. And here they're actually lined up correctly, so you can see that there is a safe spot at A, B, C, and D. However, do not do what I am about to do and immediately run off to my safe spot, because it could be sword form that Shiva ends up in, and not staff form. If it's staff form, run off to your safe spots. However, if it's sword form, you want to stay stacked in front of Shiva very briefly so you can all as a group eat Ice Brand. I run off to my save point, which I should not have done, which left everyone else to be hit by Ice Brand, which means they all got hit for marginally more damage than they needed to. It certainly didn't help that Midnight Celeste was already dead, so they were already taking more damage than needed. But once that's done, wait for the AoEs to clear. Oh wait, permafrost again, so be sure not to move, as Minkoi did. Thankfully, Minkoi was far enough away that he didn't slide far enough to hit the edge. But now that we're back in sword form, we can actually take a look at some of the other moves in sword form. One of which is Glacier Bash. Glacier Bash, as you just saw there, does a pretty substantial amount of damage, and it is not distributed amongst the party like Ice Brand is. However, it can be avoided. When you see it casting, the tank merely runs through Shiva and to stand behind her. It should go off, hit nobody, and the tank can run right back in front of her again. Another move that Shiva does in sword form is Whiteout. Whiteout is a donut-shaped AoE that will hit everything in the arena except for the very small area directly around Shiva. As long as everyone is stacking on Shiva's backside, as they should be, this should hit nobody. And finally, she has Heavenly Strike. Heavenly Strike should cause a number of ice spikes to bolt out of the ground and randomly across the arena. You can get hit by these and knocked back a fair amount. If you're in the center of the arena, you shouldn't have to worry about getting knocked into the ice around the edge of the arena, though. You will also take an amount of damage and suffer the minor inconvenience of having to run back up next to Shiva. But that's mostly it for sword form. At this point, you're just going to have to deal with the various attacks of sword form in seemingly random order, and that she will be changing back and forth between phases in a seemingly random order. She's once again done the AoE, signaling her change into bow form. She'll do the large bow AoE that everybody wants to stack behind. Tank pulls her north, so we can all avoid the directional AoE. At this point, you've seen pretty much everything that there is to see in this fight. It's just a matter of dealing with the mild randomness of the mechanics, as well as the stacking buffs on Shiva and the stacking debuffs on the tank. She's at 19% now, 18%, so she's only got 7 stacks of the damage up debuff on her, so we're well ahead of the time needed to make the DPS check of the whole fight, the Enrage timer. It's just a matter of everybody staying alive. Now, the second time she did this, I did wait in the middle, but the tank pulled her further south. So I was confused for a little bit and eventually decided I'm just going to run north and get in my safe spot. It occurred to me that the tank was running south and that everyone should have run to the south safe spot, where we all just eat it and don't have to worry about it. And in the later fights that this farm party did, I did learn what the tank was doing and correctly handled that. Now you'll see both healers died, and I had to do a limit break 3, but she's almost dead. The tank is certainly not going to last much longer, but he lasted long enough for us to win the day. As I mentioned before, you get an item level 110 weapon, which can be upgraded to 120, as well as a bracelet that's item level 120. But that is it for Shiva Extreme. I am honestly a really big fan of this fight, and I'm excited to get the chance to do it. But until next time, everyone.